Welcome to the Ranger's Respite. I'm Philip, and today we're looking at a whiskey from a distillery in bout 5 of round 2 of the Virginia Whiskey Tournament. That is Hilltop Distillery's Straight Bourbon Whiskey. And before we get into this, I have to pitch support of the channel. If you like these videos, if you like the Virginia Whiskey Tournament, or you are a fan of the Single Malt Frontier, I have an Etsy shop linked in the description down below. Proceeds from the sales generated there support the channel. I sell bowls that I've made myself. This one is American Cherry. And I sell pens, some of which come in a neat cardboard box. All of the higher end pens that are made from bourbon barrels do. This one is made from a Jim Beam barrel. It's a roller ball. It's very nice. If you are looking for a way to support continued production of this show, or if you just have some money and need a good pen or a nice bowl to hold things around the house, that is a solution for you. Now, with that out of the way, Hilltop Straight Bourbon Whiskey. Hilltop Distillery is in Maidens, Virginia. They do their own distilling, so this is not sourced. It is bottled at 40% alcohol by volume, and it is the typical $44.99 entry price for a craft whiskey. Let me read from the back of the bottle for you. For Maidens, Virginia foothills, dotted with majestic oak trees hundreds of years old, comes this bourbon whiskey. Made from the finest grains, this whiskey ages 2 years in charred new white oak barrels until the peak of maturity. So, I like the bottle. Just some notes. I like the bottle. The square logo, I think, could use some work, but that is just my personal opinion. You don't have to agree or disagree with me. The only complaint that I have about this bottle shape is just about every time I go to pour it, I get to about here and it's just real sudden. And if I pour this way, it's much better, but it's an awkward grip, because of the bottle shape. But it's distinct, it's unique, it stands out, and that's enough about that. Let's take a look at the whiskey itself. It's fairly pale. It's a hair aggressive on the nose. I don't have a mash bill on this, but I would say that there's probably a little bit of rye in here. Just there's some like heavy baking spice notes on the nose. There is that sort of unfortunate, maybe a little bit deep into the tails note that's a little bit of like a wet cardboardy funk. It has that nice, bright, grain-forward shininess that a lot of people look for in a craft bourbon. It does have some of that like oak tannin bitter and a little bit of like baking spice. And it's got a note that I can't quite identify. And it is a little bit sharp in the nose. It's just nature of young whiskey, and 2 years is fairly young. That that slightly deep into the tails funk carries through onto the palate. It's one of the more prominent notes, unfortunately. Um, it does deliver an interesting surprise oak note that I wasn't expecting based on the nose. Coming back to the nose, I don't detect it very much on the nose, but it's got that like rich um vanilla with that like sort of like it it doesn't have the texture, but like a sawdusty note. Like like it the taste reminds me of like grabbing a handful of sawdust and like working my fingers so it falls out and leaves a film of like the fine gritty sawdust powder on my fingers. There is still some of that baking spice in there. Some just a hint of maybe like lemon zest or something. And that like bright green shininess, sweet corn. But yeah, it unfortunately is fairly heavy on that little bit deep into the tails, cardboardy funk on the palate. On the finish, it is very young, slightly slightly more oaky. Like there's like that hint of like fresh cut green oak wood and a little bit of like baking spice, but it's primarily that young, a little bit into the tails cut sort of flavor. And that's something that as they gain experience with blending and as they deepen their stocks to draw from, their whiskey will get older and you'll start to see that specific note disappear. Whether it's because they don't cut as deeply into the tails or if it's because it spends enough time in in the barrel that those notes get soaked up into the oak and stick there when the whiskey comes back out of the oak. Because did you know that that's one of the things that oak does is it takes the compounds that are in the alcohol and uh as barometric pressure and temperature shift, it soaks into the oak and then comes back out and it leaves behind those heavier compounds that get tangled up in the oak and it pulls out the lighter compounds such as the vanillin, that the tannins that provide the like bittersweet oaky notes and the like cinnamon and the little bit of like charcoaly flavors. And so you get something that sort of over time evolves and the funky less desirable notes such as the sort of wet cardboardy funk that you get in heavy tails cuts sort of stays with the barrel and the whiskey itself takes in exchange more of the softer gentler vanilla notes, but if it stays too long you get some of the breakdown and you get some of the like harsher oak bitter notes. It's a balancing act, and it's something that a lot of craft distilleries sort of really start looking at, evolution and nailing down how they want to balance that later, 6 to 7 years after they've started. That said, let's go over those 3 questions that I ask and answer. Do I enjoy it? Yeah, I guess it is a bourbon, and I'm less excited about bourbon in general. And it doesn't really jump out at me, and it's got some flaws that make it less interesting to drink. But as I have always said, this is an interesting to me dram, because for as much as I spend a lot of time drinking craft whiskey, most of the craft whiskey that I've had doesn't have these notes that are stereotypically associated with craft whiskey and young small distilleries, which is that deep tails cut, the um, sort of young aggressiveness on both the palate and on the nose. And it's interesting academically. So I will say that I do kind of enjoy it. Do I think it's a good value at $44.99? Yes. Yes, you can buy better whiskey for less, but you aren't just buying the whiskey. You are also buying into the future of the Hilltop Distillery. You are buying into the future of craft distilling. When you buy from a craft distillery, you support them and allow them to get to a point where they are putting out something that is a more polished product. Do I recommend it? If you are in the part of Virginia where they are, absolutely, 100%. If you happen to see it on the shelves and you aren't really familiar with that sort of young craft bourbon profile and you would like an example to learn from, it's right there. $44.99 isn't a lot of money. It is compared to, say, Old Overholt, Old Grandad, but what you're getting is a piece of a young new distillery that's doing new and interesting things. Somebody that without your support will not continue, will not learn, grow, and thrive. So yeah, I recommend it. You should pick up a bottle. Compare it to a lot of offerings from larger distilleries and try to pick out notes here and there that you like and dislike and see what's different in it from, say, a Jim Beam white label or Basil Hayden's. Basil Hayden's. That's a good comparison. Also 40%, also in that price range, but it's from Jim Beam and it's marketed as an upmarket bottle. So that's just my sort of 2 cents. This has a place on the market. They have a bright future, and I hope to see more from them in the future. With that said, like I mentioned earlier, they're in the Virginia Whiskey Tournament. Round 2. They are up against Blue Shepherd Spirits. If you think that this is interesting and you would like to see them continue on to round 3, give them a vote. As always, the links to vote are in the description down below. Instagram, Twitter, you can vote in both places. I've also got links to my Etsy shop. And there will be a link to Hilltop Distillery's website as well. So, I think that covers everything. So, until next time, stay happy, stay geeks, sláinte.